Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Dota Underlords has just put out a new update, the update in which Bloodseeker, period. That's not a complete sentence, and admittedly this is probably one of their worst titles. I don't know if they just forgot to finish it or if I'm missing a joke here or something, but this is the update in which Bloodseeker, period. Alright, anyway, so let's get right into it. So the general changes here, it's a pretty long list of general changes. Most of these are fixes, bug fixes, UI changes, fix some crashes. Nothing that I want to dig too terribly deeply into, but feel free to look it over if you're interested in those kind of things. I know there's been a lot of some bugs and some UI issues been popping up here and there, so that's why it's so long, and hopefully they address most, if not all of them. Okay, on to the actual gameplay changes. The Underlord changes Hobgen, Friendly Fire Hobgen, who was probably my pick for the worst Underlord. He's the one that I just would never really take, other than maybe if you're playing like 6 mages, but even then there's often better choices. His explosions from Friendly Fire, his ultimate, now deal full damage to all cells in the blast area. Previously it was just the unit in the center of the blast radius would take full damage, and then everybody right around it would take half damage. So really, this is a pretty big buff to him. That Friendly Fire should be dealing a lot more damage because of it. That still doesn't really change the issue that Friendly Fire often comes in a little bit too late into the fight to really make a difference, especially if you're playing with a squishier mage comp to really buff that up. The fight's generally going to be close to over, but now with the more damage, maybe it has a little bit stronger ability to clean up fights that are maybe close, and so I think it's a good buff. It's definitely good. I don't know if it puts this Friendly Fire Hobgen into like the top tier of Underlords by any means, but it probably moves him from the worst Underlord to probably a little bit more pickable in some situations. Okay, on to the actual hero changes. Now, of course, this update is the update in which Bloodseeker, and so we had to have a Bloodseeker nerf here. And admittedly, this is not as big a nerf as I was really expecting. The attack speed bonus, that's the amount of bonus attack speed that he can gain from his Blood Rage ability, has been decreased from 500 down to 300. So instead of attacking 5 times as fast when the enemy is at really low health, he's going to only attack 3 times as fast, which I guess that's actually a pretty big nerf, all things considered. You know, it cuts his DPS gain not quite in half. So that's actually that is a pretty substantial nerf. I still think that Bloodseeker was not maybe as detrimental to the meta as people were making him out to be. He was definitely a strong unit, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't really like a problematic unit at higher ranks. Like, he was strong early game, and then by mid and late game most people switched away from them unless they had like a couple Stonehill items and like a really good snowball going with him, and then he would work to the late game, but that was rare. And so I think at lower ranks, when people were playing a little bit less well-developed compositions and a little bit weaker, just full structural compositions, Bloodseeker was wreaking havoc because he's kind of easy-ish to counter at once you get a really good composition together. But if you're running an incomplete one or an inefficient one, then Bloodseeker is just too easy to run over a lot of those comps. So he's been taken down quite a bit here. They did give him a slight adjustment down here. It says the target health at which Bloodseeker will reach his maximum attack speed bonus. It used to scale up so that a 3-star Bloodseeker, for instance, would gain his attack speed ever so slightly faster. It was barely noticeable, but now it's been standardized across the board, which is good for clarity. I guess it's a slight buff to 1-star Bloodseeker, a slight no change to 2-star, and a slight nerf to 3-star. Not that big a deal. Overall, this is a pretty big nerf to Bloodseeker, and we should definitely see him posing a little bit less terror to most games. Certainly in the late game, I still think he'll be a strong early option with other Bloodbound because he still hits pretty hard, but not quite as dangerous and meta-defining in the early game as he used to be. Okay, Earth Spirit. This one got a pretty big buff. Earth Spirit was one of the weaker units in the game, and that's because he had such a long cooldown. In a Spirit build that wants to be spamming spells, Earth Spirit's cooldown was really like a once per fight kind of thing. It would very rarely ever cast twice, especially because he's a frontliner and he would be focus fired down. So they've given him a huge buff here. His cooldown is now 8 seconds across the board. It used to be 20 seconds, and even at 2-star it used to be 18, so that is a massive difference. Like, he's not going to get 2 and change casts off before he would normally get a second one. So yeah, that's pretty huge. And I definitely think this will bring spirits a little bit closer back into the meta. They got nerfed a couple patches back where the mana gain from the spirits was a little bit slower. It wasn't working during the Delta Slam like it used to. But I think this change is actually really huge. I would not be surprised to see spirits move back into an S tier composition, one of the top builds in the meta after this change, especially because one of their weaknesses was against Bloodseeker, who was magic immune as he was running around. So if Bloodseekers are getting a little bit weaker, I think spirits really benefit from that, and this Earth Spirit buff. Definitely look for spirits to be a top tier composition coming in this patch. Io, definitely one of the weaker units. The tether kind of... It got buffed, I guess. The tether no longer snaps when Io gets broken. So if like a Nyx assassin would jump on Io and break, it doesn't snap the tether. However, the tether target will not gain any benefit from the tether if the target itself is broken. So if your damage dealer, whoever is tethered, is broken, they will not gain the passive bonus attack speed and damage reduction, which makes a lot of sense. Still don't think Io really moves up too much in priority. It's definitely a lower tier kind of unit that you rarely see used. Sometimes if you're going for 4 druids, you might want to throw it in, but yeah, and even then, I kind of think other druids are better for that purpose. So it's hard to see exactly where Io fits into the current meta, and I don't think this really changes anything about it, unlike, the Earth Spirit, which really changes it a lot. Legion Commander, my favorite unit. Legion Commander, unfortunately got a nerf here. Well, you can think of it as a little bit of a rework. It's not quite a nerf. Both Legion Commander and her target during the duel cannot receive healing while that duel is active. So this is a massive nerf to Legion Commander when she's paired up with Warlocks, or just any kind of other healing alliance. Normally when she would be a Warlock, she would cast her duel, she would hit really hard because she also gets the demon bonus and all the other bonuses when she casts the duel, and then the Warlock healing would kick in and bam, just like knock her right back up to full health or something like that. That's not going to happen anymore. She still is going to be pretty terrifying if she can 1 or 2 shot the duel target and just kill them off really quick. Then she can still benefit a little bit from that Warlock healing after the duel is over because she's already won it. But she won't have quite as much burst healing right at the start. So I think this is a fair nerf. She's been kind of out of control really ever since she got moved down to 2 cost, down from 3. And yeah, this makes her less appealing to pair with Warlocks, but I think with any other alliance she's still pretty good. I still think in Knights builds where you're running like Knights plus healers, and maybe you throw in Warlocks with like a Mr. Warlock and a Necrophos. This takes her down a notch, but I don't think it kills her in those comps, because once again, if she just 1 or 2 shots that target and then the duel's over, she can still make another auto attack or 2 and continue healing up right afterwards. I assume this would not interfere with the Dragon Alliance, which heals her right after she wins a duel. I just thought of that off the top of my head, like, wait a second. No, it wouldn't interfere with that. Okay, Queen of Pain. Her assassin blink duration has been changed from 1 second to 1.25 seconds. Now, what this means is that every single one of the assassins in the game has a duration in which they disappear from the battlefield whenever they're jumping. You may notice that some units like physically jump and you can see them move. Others disappear, like Nyx Assassin and Queen of Pain, where they'll disappear from the board and then reappear somewhere else after a delay. And that's like one of the knobs they can use to balance some of the assassins. And here, Queen of Pain, she'll be disappeared from the board for an extra 1/4 of a second. Now, you can kind of think of that as either a buff or a nerf depending on what you want out of her. If you want her to be in combat fighting, making as many auto attacks, being as active as possible, it's definitely a nerf. She's going to be out of commission for a 1/4 of a second, which doesn't sound like much. I mean, it's like, half of an auto attack or something. So it's really not that bad. But if you think of it as you want to keep her safe, you want her to not take aggro, you want her to be kind of your lone carry that never gets hit. This will delay her from jumping into the backline along with the other assassins, so she probably will not be taking the initial brunt of the attacks. That being said, I kind of liked when she was taking a hit or 2 just so she could quickly get her Scream of Pain off. So this might be a very slight nerf overall, because both cases seem, maybe it's a little bit weaker. But I could easily see the argument the other way for it being a buff. So I'll just chalk this one up as a slight adjustment, not really positive or negative until I get to test with it a little bit more. Okay, Shadow Shaman got a massive buff, which is good because Shadow Shaman was the weakest unit in the game by a fair margin. His maximum mana is now down to 70, which for those of you who don't know, this was actually one of the changes that Shadow Shaman got, like whenever he was a 1-cost unit, that made him really busted, was just casting his spell that much quicker and that much more consistently. So he's going to cast a little bit quicker, doesn't need to get quite as much mana. And Mass Serpent Word now has a cooldown. It used to be 60 seconds, which is basically the whole round. And now the cooldown is only 20 seconds, so it's somewhat realistic in a long fight. And, you know, with summoners, you're going to get a long fight for him to get a second set of Serpent Wards off. And the targeting is a little bit smarter. It's going to target an enemy and position wards, hopefully that all 4 can be summoned. It's not going to like target one person who's all clumped up and not actually summon any, or just summon 1 or 2. He's going to try to get the most he can. Additionally, the Serpent Ward health total has been buffed by about 20% across the board, which is, you know, rather substantial. One of their biggest problems was they would just die instantly, so a 20% health buff is pretty good. I still think they're a little bit squishy, but it's better than nothing. So I do think Shadow Shaman got a good buff in this. This is a lot of good changes to him. That being said, a Troll and Summoner, it's still really hard to fit into a Summoner build. You know, there's so many other Summoners that have like Savages or Druids or even Primordials that just fit so much better into a Summoner comp, and just trying to find a way to make a Troll Summoner work, it's kind of hard because there's no, you know, there's no other overlap between the Trolls into a Summoner build. You don't really have a Warlock Summoner or a Healer Summoner or like anything like that that would make you want to put Witch Doctor, Dazzle, and so on into the build. So I still think Shadow Shaman is going to be a lower priority to pick up, but he does get a little bit more powerful whenever you do. All right, on to Tusk. Walrus Punch can still be cast while Tusk is broken. See, I always thought that was like a weird thing because it's kind of like a cast ability, because, you know, he's like, you know, it's on a cooldown and he like physically does an action, but it was disabled while he was broken, which was weird, but I just came to accept it as the intended behavior. I thought it was coded as a passive somehow, like a passive modification to his auto attack. That being said, this is a buff to him, for sure. There's been plenty of times when I'm like, yep, Tusk would Walrus Punch right here, but he's broken. And so he doesn't punch. And that, I don't know if it's lost any fights or not, but it certainly was something that comes up more often than you'd think. So it's rather substantial buff to Tusk. And that's, I kind of view this as more of a bug fix, but it came out as a pretty big buff, and I already think Tusk is a pretty decent unit. I do think Savages are maybe a little bit underappreciated after their rework a couple patches back, but Tusk was always one of the better ones, especially in the early and mid game. All right, on to some of the item changes. Aegis of the Immortal. Resurrection time has been changed from 5 seconds down to 3 seconds, so the unit will come back quite a bit faster, and it is not disabled by break. Now, still not a great item, I don't think. I feel like most tier 4 items and most tier 5 items are still better than Aegis of the Immortal. Like, I would take, I don't know, something like Mechanism, even a BKB, often I'd probably take more than an Aegis of the Immortal. So even after these changes, I'm just not really seeing the appeal of this item. It doesn't give you any more combat stats that, yeah, your unit can come back, but it comes back just like later into the fight, and their opponents are just like ready to pounce on him. So still not a big fan of this item, but it did get a slight buff. Caden's Blade, whenever the carrier is broken, the carrier does its normal attack instead. Now, I'd heard there was a bug, I don't know if it was a bug, but there was an interaction where the unit holding Caden's Blade, if they were broken, their auto attack would deal 0 damage. They would auto attack and nothing would happen, which is obviously not good, because, you know, you don't want your item to literally make you worthless. So it's a buff to Caden's Blade. Once again, in the realm of the bug fixes, like with Tusk up above. But yeah, still a great item. I don't think this really changes any of the balance or any like the priority in which you pick Caden's Blade. You always are going to pick it against tanky opponents, against Brawnies, against Knights, against Warriors, and especially if you have fast attack speed units, or Medusa in particular. Quelling Blade will no longer target summons outside of the unit's attack range. So one instance that we've seen with Quelling Blade was like a unit, like a Drow Ranger or somebody in the back line just holding the Quelling Blade, and then they just like randomly walk forward trying to get in range of a summon, especially like in an Essex minion. So that won't happen anymore. Maybe that improves Quelling Blade a little bit if they're going to stay a little bit more put and actually do their auto attacks a little bit more often. Still probably a more niche item. Okay, on to alliance changes. Here we've got Primordials. We'll try to spawn Eidolons up to 2 cells away if nearby cells are occupied. This is kind of a corner case scenario where if a Primordial would die, but they're all surrounded by allied units or enemy units, then they just wouldn't summon an Eidolon, which was obviously not great because your whole alliance just became worthless. So they get a little bit bigger radius to like kind of throw an Eidolon in case they're surrounded. It doesn't come up too terribly much because Primordials have not been too terribly popular, although they have been picking up just a little bit. I've been seeing more and more people play them, so maybe there is something to those Primordial builds that I'm just not seeing yet. And finally, the Void Alliance has been slightly nerfed. So they added a 0.5 second cooldown to the damage proc. So now the extra pure damage cannot proc more frequently than once every half a second, regardless of how quick the unit is attacking. So obviously this is a very targeted nerf at Void Hunters, right? Which was, if you watch my guide on that, I said they were the strongest build in the meta, and it wasn't particularly close. I ran some numbers on this math. So assuming this affects the Hunters when they do their multiple attack for the Hunter Alliance, and it only affects that. If it only affects that part, I think it would, in theory, affect like if you do one auto attack and then do kind of like a double auto attack and then, you know, a third auto attack. I don't have a third hand. There we go. You know, if you go like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 2 and 3, they both can't proc. But if one of them does and the other one doesn't, then you're fine. So I ran the numbers on that, assuming that's all it affects, and it's about a 10% nerf to the Void Alliance damage. So if you would auto attack 100 times, you would normally get about 57 or 52 Void procs. That's because you get the 30 extra attacks from the Hunter Alliance, and then you get multiply that by 40, or 40%. So you normally get about 52 Void procs. But under this this nerf, you'd get about 47. So it's about 5 less out of 52. So, you know, roughly 10%, a little bit less than 10% nerf. Now, if you have a really fast attack speed, like say you're a hunter next to a draw ranger and you have an attack speed item, which was a pretty common scenario, it'll actually probably be a bigger nerf than that, because some of your natural auto attacks or the auto attacks in between those like double hits would kind of overlap. So like if you would hit on the second, you trigger the void in the second double hit. So like 1, 2, 3, but then on the third one you hit trigger void, then your fourth, your regularly scheduled auto attack can't trigger void. So it probably is a little bit bigger nerf than that. All of that is to say, I still don't think Void Hunters are bad. I don't think this really kills the comp in any way. I think it maybe moves them out of like alone in S tier to now maybe they share S tier with like spirits, right? With the Ember Spirit bonus, or sorry, Earth Spirit bonus. So it is a small nerf to the Void Alliance damage output, but it doesn't gut them by any means. And I still think they're going to be a strong build. I still think Void Hunters are going to be quite strong after this. So it's about a 10, maybe a bit more percent nerf to the Void Alliance when paired with Hunters specifically. It definitely makes 6 Hunters really bad with Void, but that was kind of a rare scenario anywhere. I was doing the math assuming 3 Hunters, which was the more common build. So all things considered, I think this is a good set of balance changes. We brought up some of the weaker units, the Shadow Shaman, the Earth Spirit. We definitely brought down some of the outliers like Bloodseeker and even Legion Commander to an extent got brought down. So my prediction for the upcoming meta, we're still going to have Void Hunters are going to be strong. We're still going to have Spirits moving back near the top of this Earth Spirit buff. I think Legion Commander plus Knights plus Bloodbound could still be like a good like A tier composition, like tier 2, like right underneath the top of the top after this slight nerf to Legion Commander. Not sure about Assassins. Assassins like occasionally pop up and they can occasionally work, but they require a lot of things to go right. I don't think the Screen of Pain nerf changes anything, or rework changes anything. And then other than that, there's a whole bunch of kind of like tier 2 and like secondary type of builds, but I think those are going to be the top builds in the current meta. Void Hunters, Spirits, and probably Knights plus Legion Commander. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.